Bone is a connective tissue, which means that it must have cells, ground substance, and fibers. Let's take a look at each one of these components one by one. There are 4 different cell types that are found in bone. All 4 of them are shown on this picture. 3 of them are above the line I just drew. 1 of them we can see below the line. 3 of them are very strongly related, and 1 is very different. So let's take a look at these one by one. Osteogenic cells, also known as osteoprogenitor cells, are stem cells. They're bone stem cells, and they exist on the periosteal and endosteal surface, so on the outer and inner periphery of the bone. What the osteogenic cells can do is they can differentiate, they can turn into osteoblasts. And an osteoblast is a bone-forming cell. Osteoblasts produce the matrix of bone and form bone until they trap themselves inside of the matrix. They leave themselves a little space to live called a lacuna, and then they become less active. And when they're less active, trapped in a lacuna, contained within the matrix that they produced, that cell is known as an osteocyte. The 4th cell type is very different from the other 3. They're derived from white blood cells instead of bone cells, so these have a very different origin. White blood cells called monocytes fuse together to form this gigantic cell called an osteoclast. It's a large, multinucleated cell with this ruffly border that is found on the endosteal surface, so inside of the membrane lining the medullary cavity. And what it does is it breaks down bone. Osteoclasts will release acidic substances that will demineralize the matrix and reabsorb or break down bone. Just taking a quick look at the location of these 4 different cell types, what they're doing here with the forceps is detaching the periosteum just to show us that it has an intercellular layer and an outer fibrous layer. That intercellular layer, that's where osteoblasts and osteoprogenitor cells exist. In this picture, they're focused in on the endosteal surface, the membrane lining the medullary cavity, and showing us that osteoprogenitor cells are found there. And osteoclasts are also found on the endosteal surface. The osteocytes live somewhere in between the periosteum and the endosteum, embedded in the matrix. And just to take a different look at this, here we can see the osteocytes trapped in lacuna in between the lamellae. And so the osteocytes are the bone cells that exist in between the lamellae of an osteon. So to recap the 4 cell types that are found in bone, osteoprogenitor cells are the stem cells. They can differentiate into an osteoblast, and an osteoblast is the type of cell that makes bone by forming osteoid. And once that osteoblast gets trapped by the osteoid, it's known as an osteocyte. So these 3 types of bone cells are actually just different stages of one cell's life, compared to an osteoclast, completely different. These are derived from white blood cells, and they break down bone. So now that we've talked about cells, let's talk a little bit about the ground substance. Surprisingly, the ground substance is very thick, viscous, but it's not solid. It's not produced in a solid form. It contains proteoglycans and glycoproteins, so it's basically a sugar protein substance. So it's very typical of connective tissue ground substance. There's 1 fiber type present in bone, and that's collagen. Let's take a look at that. Collagen is the strongest fiber type, and in this picture, what they're showing us with the blue lines is the pattern of collagen flow. So within a lamella, all of the collagen will flow in the same direction, but when looking at the adjacent lamella, the neighboring lamella, notice how the collagen is going to flow in a different direction. And the lamella inside of that, collagen is flowing in a different direction. And so the fact that the collagen flows in different directions within the various lamellae really strengthens the bone. And of course, this is further strengthened by the addition of calcium in the form of calcium crystals called hydroxyapatite. So let's just take a quick look at this picture. What they're showing us is big picture, that whether we're looking at compact bone or if we're looking at spongy bone, we know that that bone is going to have an arrangement of collagen fibers. And we know that collagen is the strongest of fibers. Collagen is actually a protein in quaternary structure. So in other words, it contains several proteins that are woven together kind of like a rope. And so if we look at one of those collagen components, what they're trying to show us in this picture is this is where the calcium crystals deposit. So that's what they're showing us with these little white dots on the surface. We can see that the calcium crystals, the hydroxyapatite, actually deposit on the collagen fibers. And the collagen fibers create like an internal foundation for those, like a scaffolding for those crystals. And it's the deposit of the calcium crystals that makes the matrix solid. Both calcium and collagen are extremely important in bone structure. Taking a look at this photo, we can see a normal fibula across the top, but without mineral. That means without the deposit of calcium in the bone remains soft. And so you can see it's actually flexible, bendable. On the other hand, if the bone had just calcium deposits without collagen, it would be very brittle. It would have no flexibility. And so you can see the tendency for it to shatter. So as a little summary, we know bone is a connective tissue, which means that it has to have cells, ground substance, and fibers. There are 4 cell types. There are stem cells called osteoprogenitor cells that can give rise to bone-forming cells called osteoblasts. And once the osteoblasts make bone and trap themselves inside of the matrix, they slow down and they're known as osteocytes. There's also a type of bone cell called an osteoclast that breaks down the matrix of bone. The ground substance is our typical proteoglycans and glycoproteins, a sugar protein mix with collagen fibers. And the collagen and the ground substance is solidified by the addition of calcium crystals deposited from the blood. Together, the ground substance and the fibers are known as the matrix, and the matrix of bone is known as osteoid.